"You owe us this, Audrey," my daughter-in-law declared, her voice as cold as ice right in my own kitchen, demanding $75,000 like she was asking for a cup of sugar. I turned to my son, the boy I'd spent my whole life raising, looking for some kind of support, but he just stared at the floor. His silence cut me deeper than 1,000 knives. "I'm Audrey Campbell, a 72-year-old widow from Atlanta, Georgia, and this is the story of how I had to tear down my own son's world to save my husband's honor and take back my own life. If you've ever felt betrayed by the very people you love the most, well, stick around and listen to my story, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Most of all, please leave a comment down below, share your own story or your thoughts, because sometimes just being heard is all we really need." The only sound in my kitchen that morning was the low, steady hum of the old refrigerator. It was a familiar sound, a kind of background music to my life as a widow for the last 7 years, ever since Owen passed. I found it comforting, like the gentle snoring of a loyal partner sleeping soundly in the corner. Everything in this kitchen carried the marks of time, of memories. The lacquer on the oak cabinets, the ones Owen built with his own 2 hands, one long ago summer, had started to peel in a few places. I didn't see those little cracks as decay, but as the wrinkles of a life fully lived. The vinyl floor, no matter how carefully I scrubbed it, still held the ghost of a coffee stain near the leg of the table, a clumsy memory of Jason from when he was just a teenager, my son. I was standing at the sink, a soft cloth in my hand, carefully drying the last porcelain plate from the set my mother had given me. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, bathing the room in a golden light and making the tiny dust motes dance in the air like little fireflies. The scent of lemon wax hung in the air, a smell of cleanliness, of order, of a world I could still control. In this small world, everything had its place. The grief, while it was still there, had softened into a quiet, constant ache, a part of me, just like that hum from the fridge. I had learned to live with it. I had found my peace in the daily routines, tending my garden, reading my books, and keeping this house, Owen's sanctuary, just as he left it. That peace was shattered by the sound of a car engine roaring down the street, followed by the crunch of gravel as it turned into my driveway far too fast. I frowned. Jason never drove like that. My son, for all his indecisiveness at times, was a careful man by nature. This was Brooke's driving, my daughter-in-law, a kind of driving that showed her impatience with the world, as if no road was ever wide enough and no speed limit was ever fast enough for her ambitions. A few seconds later, the kitchen door flew open without a knock. Brooke stood there, looking like a statue carved from ice and designer fabric. Today, she was wearing a perfectly tailored beige business suit, the kind of outfit that screamed power and money. Her perfume, a heavy foreign scent, flooded the room, overpowering my lemon wax. It felt like an invasion of the senses. Her eyes swept across the kitchen. I knew that look all too well. She didn't see memories. She saw things that were outdated. Her gaze flickered over the peeling lacquer on the fridge, and I saw the barest hint of a smirk. "Hello, Audrey," she said, but there was no warmth in her tone. It was a social formality she had to get through. Jason squeezed past her, following her in. My son looked tired. His shoulders were slumped, and he avoided my gaze, a habit of his whenever he was about to say or do something he knew would upset me. He was wearing an expensive shirt, but it was wrinkled, as if he'd wrestled with his own clothes before coming over. "Hi, Jason. Can I get you two some tea?" I asked, my hand still clutching the soft cloth. I was trying to cling to my routines, to common courtesy, like a drowning woman to a piece of driftwood. "There's no time for that," Brooke cut in, dropping her designer handbag onto the pine dining table that Owen had made. The sharp thud of expensive leather against humble wood was jarring. "We came to talk about something serious." I set the plate in the drying rack and turned to face them, feeling a chill run down my spine. I knew this wasn't a social call. This was an ambush. "What is it?" I asked, my voice sounding weaker than I wanted. Brooke took a deep breath, as if she were carrying some great burden. "Look, I know this is a bit sudden, but Jason and I have found the opportunity of a lifetime. A house. No, not just a house. Our future home. In Maple Creek Ridge." The name made my heart skip a beat. Maple Creek Ridge, the plot of land Owen had bought ages ago. The land where we were supposed to build our own little retirement cottage, a place with nothing but a garden and quiet. But then Owen got sick, and that dream was put on hold, tucked away with other keepsakes in the chest in our bedroom. The house is perfect, Brooke went on, her eyes lighting up with that sick glow she got when talking about material things. Modern design, open concept, floor-to-ceiling windows. There's even a big yard for the kids to play in someday. Kids? I repeated. They hadn't even been planning on having children. You have to prepare for the future, Audrey, she said, as if I were a fool for not understanding the obvious. The thing is, it's a hot property. A lot of people want it. We had to act fast. We've already put down a deposit. I looked at Jason. My son was still staring at that coffee stain on the floor like it was the most interesting thing in the world. He was letting his wife do all the dirty work. How much was the deposit? I asked, though a terrible feeling was already creeping in. That's the problem, Brooke said, her voice shifting to a different tone, one that was all business and ice. The deposit is non-refundable, and we need a little help with the down payment. The deadline is this Friday. Silence filled the kitchen. All that was left was the hum of the refrigerator, but it didn't sound comforting anymore. It sounded like a trapped hornet. How much help? I tried to keep my voice steady. Brooke looked me straight in the eye, without a hint of hesitation. $75,000. The number just hung there in the air between us, heavy and ugly. $75,000. That was a huge chunk of the savings Owen had worked his entire life to put away for me, to make sure I'd never have to worry about money after he was gone. It was my security. It was his promise. I took a deep breath, trying to sort through the chaos in my head. I've told you both before, my savings are for my retirement. Your father wanted me to be secure. A small, cruel smile touched Brooke's lips. Secure in this? This dump? She gestured dramatically with her hand, taking in the walls, the cabinets, my entire life. Jason, say something. You can't just stand there. Finally, Jason looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and weary. Mom, he started, his voice barely a whisper. It's just. We already put the deposit down. We didn't really think it would be a problem. We thought you'd want to help. Help? Brooke jumped in, her voice sharp as a razor. It's not help, Jason. It's an investment in the family's future. A nest egg for your children. You owe us this, Audrey. You owe us this. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. Me, who had spent a lifetime giving, was now being accused of being in debt to my own son and his greedy wife. I owed them a life of luxury they couldn't afford on their own. I owed them a fancy house built on a foundation of irresponsibility. I looked at my son, my eyes pleading, hoping to find a trace of the little boy I had raised, the boy who used to cry if he broke a flower stem in my garden, the boy who promised he'd take care of me when I was old, but all I saw was a stranger, a man held captive by his own weakness, a prisoner standing behind his wife, the warden. His silence was more painful than any accusation. His silence was his consent. He was standing there, right on the coffee stain he'd made 20 years ago, and letting someone else break his mother's heart. A sharp pain flared in my chest, the bitter and deep pain of betrayal. I felt humiliated in my own kitchen, the place where I had cooked him thousands of meals, wiped his tears, and listened to his dreams. Now, it had become a courtroom, and I was the one on trial. My hands tightened on the edge of the old Formica countertop. The cool surface grounded me, a hard, solid truth in a sea of swirling emotions. I felt the frailty, the widow's grief, begin to burn away, and from those ashes, something else was rising. Something cold, hard, and fierce. It was anger. "Owe you?" My voice trembled, not from fear, but from a rage that was boiling up inside me. "I have given you everything, my love, my time, even the last of my savings when your little business failed. Do you remember that?" Brooke scoffed, a nasty sound. "That online craft store? Please, that was child's play. This is the big leagues, Audrey. We're building an empire, and you're standing in the way." "Brooke, don't." Jason finally spoke, but it was too weak, too late. I wasn't looking at Brooke anymore. I was staring straight at my son. "Do you really think I owe you this, Jason? After everything?" He looked back down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. His silence was the answer. And in that moment, I knew the fight was on. A fight not just for my money, but for Owen's legacy, for my own dignity. A fight to take back control of my life from people who saw me as nothing more than a bank account to be emptied. I took one last, deep breath, feeling the solid counter beneath my fingers. When I spoke, my voice didn't tremble anymore. It was calm, cold, and as final as a judge's sentence. My answer is no. My no hung in the heavy kitchen air. It wasn't a shout or a fiery challenge. It was just a simple fact, delivered with all the weary resolve I could muster. For a second, it felt like time stopped. The hum of the old fridge suddenly seemed deafening, as if it was trying to fill the dead space my refusal had created. Even the dust motes in the sunbeam seemed to freeze in place. Brooke was the one who broke the silence. She didn't get angry. Anger I could have handled. Instead, she let out a short, dry laugh, a sound with no humor in it at all. It was the sound a grown-up makes at a stubborn child, a laugh full of pity and condescension. "No?" she repeated like she'd just heard a bad joke. "Audrey, you don't really understand the situation here. This wasn't a suggestion for you to think about. This is a fact. We need that money." My eyes drifted past her, past the perfectly made-up face, past the expensive suit, and landed on the handbag she'd tossed onto my dining table. The cream-colored leather bag, with its gleaming gold clasp, sat on the rustic pine like a foreign object, as out of place as a peacock in a henhouse. I don't know much about fashion, but I know a thing like that costs as much as some folks' entire retirement fund. It was a symbol, a declaration of a world where a number like $75,000 could be demanded so casually on a Tuesday afternoon. That world wasn't my world, and it sure as hell wasn't Owen's. Owen's world was built on different values: hard work, integrity, and a quiet contempt for meaningless flash. What would he do if he were here? I could almost hear his deep, steady voice in my head, not nagging, just asking a simple question. What did they do to earn it, Audrey? The answer was nothing. The cold anger inside me began to harden, turning into something solid and sharp, like steel. I looked at that purse, then down at my own hands resting on the counter. Knobby knuckles, thin fingers, skin spotted with age. These were the hands that had pulled weeds in the garden for 40 years. The hands that had changed Jason's diapers, baked hundreds of birthday cakes, and held Owens tight during his last days in the hospital. These were hands of labor and love, not of entitlement. I took a breath, pulling my voice up from a deep well of hurt. My words came out as barely a whisper, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. "Earn it." Jason flinched, as if my whisper had been a thunderclap. He finally lifted his head from the floor, and I saw panic in his eyes. He knows me. He knows that when my voice gets quiet like that, I've never been more serious. Brooke, though, took it as a sign of weakness. Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating look. She shot a quick glance at Jason, a sharp look that was an order to act. But Jason stayed frozen, paralyzed between loyalty to his mother and fear of his wife. Seeing my son was useless, Brooke decided to deliver the final blow herself. She pulled her phone from her purse. I couldn't see the screen, but I heard the faint buzz as a message was sent, and I saw Jason's jaw clench as his own phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a coordinated move, a two-front attack I hadn't seen coming. I'd realize later that was the moment she sent her husband an ultimatum, a cruel command. Get her to pay, or we're done. She put her phone away and turned back to me. Her voice was now dangerously quiet, each word coated in a sickly sweet layer of ice. "All right, Audrey. If that's how you want it." She took a step closer, invading my personal space. "Then you can choose." She paused, letting the words hang in the air for maximum impact. "Your son or your money?" "What in the world are you talking about?" I whispered, my throat suddenly tight. "It's very simple," Brooke said, a sick little smile playing on her lips. "If you don't help us, we'll have no other choice. That house is our future. If we lose it, we'll have to start over somewhere else, somewhere far away." She paused, her eyes drilling into me. "And you will never meet your grandchild." The final blow. The grandchild that didn't even exist, a ghost summoned from the future to blackmail me. It was a move of such breathtaking cruelty that it left me speechless. I looked over at Jason, searching for a denial, a protest. any sign at all that my son was not a part of this monstrous act. "Jason," I pleaded. "Brooke, don't," he stammered, but his voice trailed off. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't look at his wife. He just stared into the empty space between them, a coward trapped in a nightmare of his own making. "I'm giving you a choice," Brooke said, her voice still frighteningly even. "Think about it. Hard." With that, she turned, grabbed Jason by the arm, and practically dragged him out of the kitchen. "Let's go, darling. Your mother needs time to think." The slam of the front door echoed through the empty house. And then, there was only silence. A completely different kind of silence than before. This wasn't the silence of peace. This was the silence of abandonment, of an emptiness that went bone deep. I was still standing there, at the kitchen table, my hands gripping the wood. I felt as if all the strength had been siphoned out of my body, leaving behind an empty shell. The kitchen, my safe harbor, suddenly felt cold and foreign. The walls seemed to be closing in, and the hum of the refrigerator now sounded like a mournful wail. I don't know how long I stood there. A few minutes? Half an hour? Time seemed to have lost all meaning. Finally, my legs, as if they had a mind of their own, began to move. I wasn't thinking. I was just acting on pure instinct. I stumbled out of the kitchen, through the living room where Owen's armchair still sat in its place, and started up the stairs. Each step was a monumental effort. The banister felt like ice beneath my hand. This house, a home once filled with love and laughter, now felt like nothing more than a tomb for memories. I walked into our bedroom. My bedroom. The room still held the faint scent of Owen. Not a cologne, but the subtle, clean smell of cedar from his closet, of old paper from the books on his nightstand, and a hint of the fresh air he always loved. The late afternoon light slanted through the window, casting a golden dust over the neatly made bed. On Owen's side, the pillow was still plumped just so, as if he'd only stepped out for a moment and would be right back. The grief I had managed to choke down during the confrontation finally burst forth. A choked sob escaped my chest. I sank to the floor, right beside the large oak chest at the foot of the bed. This was Owen's memory chest. He'd built it himself from leftover planks when we first built the house. Inside, he kept everything that was truly important to him, not things of monetary value, but things of the heart. My hands trembling, I lifted the heavy lid. A scent of time and memory washed over me. On top were the old photo albums, their leather covers worn soft. I flipped through a few pages, seeing pictures of us when we were young, our smiles bright and carefree. Then pictures of Jason as a baby, chubby and cherubic. I traced my finger over my son's smiling face in a photo, wondering where that person had gone. Beneath the albums were bundles of letters, tied with faded ribbons. The letters Owen wrote me when he was in the service. The letters I wrote back. Stories of love, of longing, and of dreams for a future together. And then, my hand touched something soft. I pulled it out. It was Owen's old wool sweater. A moss-green cardigan, the cuffs a little frayed, with a tiny burn hole near the elbow from a stray cigarette ash. He loved this sweater. He wore it when he was working in his wood shop, when he was reading in the evenings. I pulled the sweater to my chest and buried my face in the thick wool. His scent, the scent of his life, was still there, clinging to the fibers. And that's when I finally broke. Not silent tears, but racking sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for Owen, for his loss. I cried for the son I felt I had lost. I cried for my own loneliness, for my powerlessness, for the pain of being betrayed by my own flesh and blood. I felt so small, so weak, crushed under the weight of the world's greed and cruelty. I just sat there and cried, letting the pain pour out of me. But then, through the blur of my tears, something started to change. As I clutched Owen's sweater, I felt more than just the softness of the wool. I felt the strength of the man who wore it. Owen was no weakling. He was a quiet man, but inside him was a spine of solid rock. He was a man of rules, of principles that never bent. He believed in fairness, in honor, and in protecting what was his. I suddenly remembered Brooke's words. He was too weak. That's why you're living in this wreck. A sudden, ice-cold rage flared up inside me, extinguishing the flames of my grief. Weak? Owen, who worked 2 jobs so I could stay home with Jason. Owen, who had built nearly everything in this house with his own 2 hands. Owen, who faced down cancer with quiet courage until his very last breath. No, Owen wasn't weak. Jason was the weak one. Brooke was the sick one. And they had dared to insult his memory. They had dared to turn his legacy into an excuse for their own greed. My tears stopped. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The air no longer felt heavy. It felt sharp and cold. The grief was still there, but it had receded, making way for something else. A cold determination. A brutal clarity. I was no longer a heartbroken widow hiding in her bedroom. I was the guardian of Owen Campbell's legacy, and I would not let anyone desecrate it. I folded the wool sweater carefully and placed it back in the chest. But this time, as I looked at the keepsakes inside, I wasn't searching for comfort. There were no more tears. The cold rage had burned them to ash. I sat on the floor next to the open memory chest, no longer seeking comfort, but confirmation. Confirmation of Owen's life, of everything he had believed in and built. Brooke's accusation that Owen was weak echoed in my mind not as an insult, but as a blasphemy. They had crossed a sacred line, trampled on holy ground, and I would not let that stand. My hand, no longer trembling with grief but strangely steady, began to search through the chest. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Exactly. A letter, maybe. A journal. Some piece of paper that would remind me of the strength of the man I married. My hand slid past the worn leather of the photo albums, over the bundles of ribbon-tied letters. I could feel the texture of the past beneath my fingertips. I could smell the old paper, the cedar wood, the faint hint of mothballs. This was the archive of our lives. And then, my fingers brushed against something different. It wasn't soft like the letters or hard and flat like the albums. It was thick, stiff, with a certain formality to it. Curious, I traced its edge, feeling the sturdiness of an important document. I gently pushed the stacks of letters aside and pulled it out. It was a heavy, dark brown leather folio, aged but perfectly preserved. There were no markings on the outside. It felt heavier than I expected, containing something of weight, both physically and metaphorically. My heart began to beat a little faster, a mix of excitement and foreboding. Owen was a meticulous man. He never kept junk. If this was in here, among his most precious memories, it was here for a reason. I placed the folio on my lap and carefully unfastened the tarnished brass clasp. Inside, wrapped in a thin layer of tissue paper, was a sheaf of documents. I pulled them out. The top page, printed on heavy, creamy stock, bore a large formal heading, Deed of Ownership, Real Property. My throat went dry. I read on. The legal descriptions, parcel numbers, and coordinates swam before my eyes, but I was focused on only 2 lines. The first was the property address, Lot 4B, Maple Creek Ridge Development. Maple Creek Ridge. The name was a thunderclap, the very place Brooke had mentioned, the place where they were trying to buy their dream house. I had always known Owen owned that land. It was our retirement dream, a sweet secret we'd nurtured together. We used to walk it on Sunday afternoons, Owen pointing out where our porch would face the old oak trees. But I had always assumed it was in his name, or maybe both of our names. And then I read the second line, the fateful line that changed everything. Legal owner of record, Audrey Campbell. Just my name. Audrey Campbell. I read it again and again, the letters seeming to dance on the page. Not Mr. and Mrs. Owen Campbell, not Owen Campbell, just my name, alone. I tried to remember. Owen had bought this land a long, long time ago, when he was still in good health. Why would he have put it only in my name? Back then, there was no reason to. We shared everything. And then, it hit me. A simple, profound truth washed over me, leaving me breathless with love and admiration. Owen, my practical, forward-thinking husband, hadn't done this for tax purposes or some legal reason at the time. He had done this for the future, a future he might not be in. He had placed this vital asset entirely under my control, uncontestable, indivisible, untouchable by anyone else. It was an ultimate act of protection, a gift of independence and power delivered to me from beyond the grave. He had known, somehow, he had known that I would need this one day. "You owe us this." Brooke's voice rang in my head, but it sounded hollow and ridiculous now. I owed them nothing. In fact, I held the very thing they craved, and they didn't even know it. A warm wave of emotion washed through me, chasing away the last of the icy rage. It was love for Owen, deeper and more fierce than ever. He was still taking care of me, even now. But that wasn't all. As I lifted the deed, I saw another stack of papers beneath it. This one looked different. Less formal, just a stack of standard papers stapled in the corner. The cover page was simply typed, "Bylaws of the Maple Creek Ridge Homeowners Association, HOA." At first, I felt a flicker of disappointment. What good was a bunch of HOA rules? But then, I saw a small yellow sticky note, carefully attached to the cover. Owen's slanted, forceful handwriting, unmistakable, leaped out at me. It felt like he was right here, whispering in my ear. I read the note. "Never let the lazy and tasteless change where we live. The power is in the rules, Audrey. The power is in the rules." That was Owen's entire philosophy. He believed in order, in structure, in the strength of the written word. With a new sense of purpose, I started flipping through the bylaws. It was dense with legalese and dry terminology. But now, I wasn't reading it as an outsider. I was reading it as an owner. I was reading it as a warrior studying the battlefield map. I skimmed past the sections on maintenance fees, pet regulations, noise ordinances, the usual stuff, and then my eyes landed on a specific chapter. Chapter 4, Architectural and Construction Regulations. My heart beat faster. I read every word carefully. Article 12, A. Colonial-style architectural uniformity. To preserve the aesthetic and historical value of the community, all new construction or major modification to existing structures within the purview of the Maple Creek Ridge HOA must strictly adhere to the colonial architectural style. Modern, minimalist, or any other designs deemed out of character with the community are strictly forbidden. A cold smile spread across my lips. A modern glass box that looks like a fish tank. I remembered Owen's contractor friend Larry saying their plan was dead on arrival. They couldn't build that house. The rules wouldn't allow it, but the final weapon was yet to come. I kept turning the pages, and then I found it. A small clause buried deep in a section titled Powers and Duties of the Founding Board, but it carried the force of a bomb. Article 4, C. Founder's Veto Power. The founding member of the HOA, or the founder's sole legal heir, holds absolute veto power over 1. Any proposed amendments to the architectural bylaws, Chapter 4, and 2. Any new building permits proposed for the lot owned by the founding member. This right is valid for a period of 5 years from the date of its formal activation via written notice to the HOA board. I had to read it 3 times to believe it. The sole legal heir, that was me. Absolute veto power. The words rang in my head like a victory bell. Absolute. Not to be argued, not to be voted down. It was a supreme authority, an unbeatable ace in the hole. Owen hadn't just built a defensive fence, he had handed me a royal scepter. He had anticipated that one day, people like Jason and Brooke might come along, people who wanted to bend the rules, to break his vision, and he had left me the tool to stop them. It all clicked into place. The deed in my name only, the ironclad HOA bylaws, the ultimate veto power, these weren't coincidences. This was a calculated plan, a legal fortress built of ink and paper. I sat there, among the wreckage of my life, and I no longer felt like a victim. I felt armed. The deed was my shield, these bylaws were my sword, and the memory of Owen was my armor. Just then, I heard the front door being thrown open with a crash. Angry, hurried footsteps pounded up the stairs. I didn't need to guess who it was. The bedroom door flew open, slamming against the wall. Jason and Brooke stood in the doorway, panting. All pretense was gone now. Jason's face was flushed with a helpless sort of anger. Brooke stood behind him, her eyes narrowed to slits, scanning the room as if searching for hidden treasure. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Jason yelled, his voice cracking with rage. "Brooke said you might have account books or some other valuable papers. Hand them over." "Account books?" I repeated, my voice so calm it surprised even me. I slowly got to my feet, the bylaws still clutched in my hand. Brooke's eyes locked onto the papers in my hand. "What is that?" she hissed. "Is that the deed to the land? Is it?" Jason strode into the room, his desperation making him cruel. He looked at me not as a son but as a creditor being denied his due. And then he uttered the words that would forever slam the door on my forgiveness. "He was too weak," he roared, pointing his finger at me, at the room, at the entire life Owen had built for us. "That's why you're stuck in this dump." All he knew was dreaming about rules and useless plots of land. "We are the future. We're trying to build something real, and you're ruining it. Stop ruining my future." A terrifying calm washed over me. All sound seemed to die away. The white-hot rage inside me was no longer a fiery emotion. It had crystallized, becoming a cold, hard diamond in my chest. I looked at my son, the child I had once loved more than life itself, and saw a stranger, someone who had betrayed everything that was supposed to be sacred. He had called Owen weak. He had called our home a dump. He had called his father's legacy useless. I clutched the bylaws in my hand. The flimsy paper suddenly felt as heavy as an iron bar. This was no longer a fight about money or a house. This was a war for the honor of a dead man. I looked straight into Jason's eyes, which now only reflected greed and resentment. I let the silence stretch, letting his toxic words hang in the air and expose their own ugliness. Then, with all the strength and contempt I could pour into a single word, I answered, "No." They left after my final refusal, leaving a silence that was heavier than a scream. The bedroom door was still wide open, a gaping wound in my privacy, but I didn't bother to close it. There was nothing left to hide and nothing left to fear. Jason's final insult to his father's memory had acted as a strange catalyst, transforming my pain and fear into something else entirely, a cold serenity, an unshakable resolve. I was no longer a wounded mother or a grieving widow. I had become the executor of my husband's unspoken will. I didn't sleep that night. I sat alone in the darkened living room, in Owen's armchair. The darkness enveloped me, but it wasn't frightening. It felt like a blanket, an ally. The only light in the room came from the blinking red numbers on the old DVD player, marking times in different passage. Outside, the suburban quiet was broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of wind through the old oak trees. I wasn't thinking about the past or worrying about the future. My mind was focused entirely on the present, on the words that had been spoken. Jason's words echoed in my head, not as a knife wound, but as a verdict. They replayed over and over, each time with more clarity, until I could dissect every word, every intonation. "You're just a bank, and this bank is closed." A bank. That's all I was to him. Not a mother. Not the woman who had carried him, who had stayed up through his fevers, who had cried with pride at his graduation. I was a financial resource, a bottomless reserve he felt entitled to tap, and when that resource refused to pay out, it became worthless. His initial greed, which could have been written off as immaturity, as youthful selfishness, had now cooled and hardened into calculated cruelty. He was no longer a lost son. He was an opponent. And what does a bank do when it's threatened? It doesn't cry. It doesn't beg. It protects its assets. A chilling clarity took hold of me. I knew exactly what I had to do. The actions weren't born of revenge, though there was certainly a bitter satisfaction to them. They were born of cold necessity. If I was a bank, then it was time I conducted an audit, cut my losses, and reinforced my security systems. My relationship with my son, as I had known it, was a bad debt, and it was time to write it off. With an almost robotic calm, I rose from Owen's chair. I walked to the small secretary desk in the corner where I kept my ancient laptop. The squeak of the hinges as I opened it sounded loud in the silent house. The cool blue light of the screen illuminated my face, turning me into a ghost in my own home. My first move was financial. I logged into my online banking portal, something I used to find intimidating and would often ask Jason for help with, but tonight I navigated the menus and security layers with ease. The numbers appeared on the screen, mine and Owen's life savings. They weren't just numbers, they were years of hard work, postponed vacations, old cars driven until they fell apart. They were sweat and sacrifice and love. I found the card management section. There was Jason Campbell's name, listed as an authorized user on my main credit card. A card meant for emergencies that had long since become a way for him and Brooke to maintain a lifestyle far beyond their means. Fancy dinners, new gadgets, spontaneous weekend trips. With every statement, I'd told myself he would get on his feet soon, that he just needed a little help getting started. What a fool I'd been. Without a moment's hesitation, I clicked the button. Remove authorized user. A dialog box popped up asking if I was sure. This action cannot be undone, it warned. I clicked confirm. A cold sense of release washed over me. One tie had been cut. Next, I opened a new tab and went to our mobile provider's website, the Family Plan. What an ironic name. For years, I had paid the bill for all three of us, thinking of it as a small, helpful thing. Now, I saw it as a subsidy for their irresponsibility. I followed the prompts to separate my line from the plan, converting it to an individual account. Their two lines, Jason's and Brooke's, would automatically be defaulted to a full-price plan, the bill for which would be sent directly to them at the end of the month. I imagined their surprise when they received it. Then came the car insurance. The sedan Jason drove, the one he proudly showed off to his friends, was still in my name. I'd bought it for him years ago, a late college graduation present. I paid the monthly insurance. I opened my email and composed a short, clear message to my insurance agent, requesting that the title be transferred fully to me and that Jason be removed from the policy as an insured driver. Effective immediately, I typed. This meant that, legally, as of tomorrow morning, he would be driving a stolen, uninsured vehicle, a risk I knew he wouldn't dare take. But I didn't stop there. Their cruelty had taught me a lesson. The most effective attacks aren't always the biggest. Sometimes, it's the death by 1,000 cuts, the daily inconveniences, that cause the most irritation and frustration. They are constant reminders of a loss of power. I logged into my Netflix account, the one I rarely used but kept active so Jason and Brooke could watch their trendy shows. I went to the profile management section. Jason and Brooke appeared, with their separate watch lists. I clicked on each name and selected Delete Profile, a petty, almost childish act, but I knew it would sting. I pictured Brooke, after a long day, sitting down on the sofa, turning on the TV, and finding her curated world of entertainment had simply vanished. Next was Amazon Prime, free 2-day shipping, a vast library of movies and music, all paid for by my credit card. I went into the household account settings and, without a flicker of remorse, removed their names. No more magically appearing packages at their door, no more unlimited movie nights. From now on, if they wanted something, they would have to pay for it themselves, like actual adults. Each click was an act of liberation. I was systematically dismantling the support structure I had unknowingly built around them for years. I had enabled them to live in a state of prolonged adolescence, shielded from the real-world consequences of life. Tonight, that shield was gone. Winter had arrived for them. When I finally closed the laptop, dawn was beginning to break in the east. The sky was turning from inky black to a deep indigo, and the stars were starting to fade. I didn't feel tired. I felt energized, a cold and focused energy. But I knew these actions were just the beginning. They were skirmishes. The real battle was still to come, and it would be fought not in cyberspace, but on a legal front. I needed a general. I poured myself a glass of water and looked out the kitchen window. My garden was still shrouded in darkness, but I could see the silhouettes of the rose bushes Owen and I had planted together. They were strong and resilient. They knew how to defend themselves with sharp thorns. I picked up my phone. My hand was perfectly steady. I scrolled through my contacts and stopped on a name, Preston Vance. Preston had been Owen's lawyer for over 30 years. He was more than a lawyer. He was a friend, a sharp and utterly dependable advisor. After Owen passed, Preston had called me several times just to check in, to make sure I was okay. I had always politely thanked him, but had never truly needed his help. Until now. I glanced at the clock. It was just after 5 a.m., far too early to call, but I knew Preston was an early riser. Just like Owen, he would be up, reading the paper with his first cup of coffee. I hit the call button. The phone rang only once before he picked up. His voice was gravelly with sleep, but alert. "Vance." Preston, I said. My own voice sounded strange, even to me. It was no longer the voice of Audrey Campbell, the gentle widow. It was the voice of someone else, someone forged in the fire of betrayal. It was calm, sharp, and had no room for weakness. Audrey? What is it? Are you all right? There was genuine concern in his voice. I'm fine, Preston. In fact, I've never been better, I replied. I'm sorry to call so early, but I need you. I need you now. Of course, Audrey. Anything. I took a breath, looking at the HOA bylaws lying on the table. My weapon. Preston, I need you to activate the Founders Clause of the Maple Creek Ridge Homeowners Association in my name. And I want you to file an immediate injunction against any and all building permits related to Lot 4B, Maple Creek Ridge. I paused for a second. Make it airtight. I want it to be a shock. There was a silence on the other end of the line. I could picture Preston sitting up straighter in his chair, his legal mind clicking into gear. He didn't ask why. He didn't question it. That's why Owen trusted him. He just processed the information and began building a strategy. I understand, he said finally, his voice now fully awake and professional. Send me copies of all the documents you have. The deed, the bylaws, everything. I'll get started immediately. And Audrey, he paused, whatever is going on, know that I am on your side. I know, Preston. Thank you. I hung up, feeling a huge weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't alone anymore. I had an ally, someone who would fight with me in the paper war to come. After the call with Preston, an efficient quiet settled over me. I had taken action. I had set my defenses and fired the first shots in a silent war. Now, all I could do was wait. This wasn't a passive or anxious waiting. It was the stillness of a leopard in the brush, watching its prey from a distance, knowing the trap was already set. I spent the morning in my garden, my own form of therapy. I pulled on my worn gloves, took my small trowel, and began methodically weeding. Each time I pulled up a stubborn dandelion, its roots clinging to the earth, I felt a deep satisfaction. I was clearing my garden, both literally and figuratively. The soil was cool and damp beneath my fingers. The scent of earth, crushed leaves, and budding roses filled the air. This was my world, an orderly world where care and patience were rewarded with beauty and life. For a few hours, I found a measure of peace. That peace was shattered around noon by the ringing of the phone inside the house. I had purposely left it in the kitchen, not wanting the outside world to intrude. But it rang and rang, persistent and urgent. I sighed, pulled off my gloves, and went inside. The screen read Doris, my sister. A wave of weariness washed over me. Doris was 4 years older than me, but sometimes it felt the other way around. She was a good-hearted woman, but deeply emotional and easily swayed. She lived in a world of high drama, where everything was viewed through a lens of intense feeling. Our relationship was fine, but there was a distance. Doris had never quite understood Owen's quiet, practical nature, and therefore had never fully understood a part of me. I took a deep breath to brace myself and answered, "Hello, Doris." "Audrey! Oh my God, Audrey!" Her voice on the other end was a mess of sobs and panic. I knew instantly. This wasn't just a bad situation. This was a coordinated attack. "Calm down, Doris. What is it?" "Speak slowly," I said, my own voice a steady counterpoint. "I can't calm down. It's awful," she wailed. "Jason, he just called me. He's in a state, Audrey. He says you're not well." Ah, there it was, their final trump card. When money and threats didn't work, they resorted to the most powerful weapon in the family arsenal, concern and guilt. They weren't coming at me directly anymore. They were trying to surround me, to cut me off from the one ally they thought I had left. They were using my own sister as a pawn. "What exactly did he say, Doris?" I asked, keeping my tone even, like a doctor diagnosing a patient. He said his credit card was declined, his phone was cut off. He said you filed paperwork to take his car away. Audrey, why would you do that? He said you're liquidating his assets." Doris relayed his words, and I could hear the genuine horror in her voice. They had chosen their phrasing carefully. Liquidating assets, a term that conjured images of a person who was frantic, out of control, in the midst of a mental breakdown. And he said, "Oh, Audrey, I hate to even say this, but I have to. Doris hesitated, milking the drama. He's worried you're becoming paranoid. That Owen's death has finally gotten to you. He's afraid you're losing your mind, Audrey. He said he just wants to help you. That tactic was more subtle and venomous than I had anticipated. They weren't just trying to isolate me. They were trying to strip me of my agency by casting doubt on my sanity. If Doris believed them, if she started telling the story to other relatives, the story of poor old Audrey finally cracked from grief, my position would be fatally undermined. Every action I took would be seen not as self-defense, but as the ramblings of a madwoman. They were trying to build a cage of pity and concern and lock me inside it. My silence on the other end of the line seemed to fuel Doris's panic. Audrey? Are you there? Are you okay? Jason said he and Brooke are just so worried. They want to get you to a doctor. A part of me wanted to scream the truth. To tell Doris about the ultimatum, the insults, the bottomless greed. To shout that her precious nephew wasn't a dutiful son worried about his mother, but a failed extortionist changing tactics. But I didn't. I realized that to explain or defend myself now would be a fatal mistake. Anything I said would be dismissed as the protests of someone losing their grip. No, you don't understand, they're the bad ones. That's exactly what a paranoid person would say. To defend myself would only confirm the narrative they were building. I couldn't win this fight by playing their game. I had to flip the whole board over. So I didn't defend. I didn't explain. I didn't deny a single thing. Instead, I asked a question. A single, surgical question, designed to cut through the layers of drama and get to the heart of the manipulation. Doris, I said, my voice low and quiet, when Jason was telling you all of that, be honest with me. Did you hear anger in his voice? Doris fell silent. The question seemed to catch her off guard. Anger? I don't know, he sounded, sad and worried. No, I said, my voice maintaining its cool calm. I'm not asking what you thought he sounded like. I'm asking what you heard. Think back. Did you hear the resentment, the frustration of someone who didn't get what he wanted? Or did you just hear Brooke's voice being repeated through his mouth? The silence on the other end of the line stretched on. This time, it wasn't the silence of shock, but the silence of consideration. I hadn't attacked Jason. I hadn't called him a liar. I had simply planted a seed of doubt, not about me, but about her source. I had forced her to consider the possibility that she wasn't a comforting aunt to a distressed nephew, but an audience to a performance directed by my daughter-in-law. I don't, Doris stammered. She was trying to reassemble the narrative in her head, but the pieces weren't fitting together so perfectly anymore. My question had created a hairline fracture in the emotional wall Brooke had built. Just think about it, Doris, I said softly, as if ending a casual chat. I wouldn't push. The seed was planted. It needed time to germinate in the darkness of doubt. And then, before she could recover, before she could pivot back to accusations and tears, I did something I rarely did to my sister. I hung up. I placed the phone down on the kitchen counter, the small click echoing in the quiet. The act felt deeply symbolic. I had severed a bridge that was already rotten and unsafe, but a bridge to a family member nonetheless. For a brief, terrifying moment, a sense of profound loneliness washed over me. Jason had turned on me, and now Doris, however unintentionally, had been turned into a weapon against me. I was truly alone, but the feeling passed as quickly as it came, replaced by a harsh acceptance. Sometimes, to survive, you have to be willing to burn bridges. Sometimes, isolation isn't a prison, it's a fortress. Having no one to explain to, no one to seek approval from, was liberating. I no longer had to worry about what others would think. I was no longer bound by the expectations of family sentiment. I had only the truth in my plan. I went back to the garden, but not to weed. I stood there, among my rose bushes, and took a deep breath. Doris's call had been a shock of cold water, but it hadn't made me tremble. On the contrary, it had tempered my will like steel. They thought they could break me by taking away my family's support, but they didn't realize that in my solitude, I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. The strength of someone with nothing left to lose, except her own honor and the honor of the man she loved. And that I would never surrender. After hanging up on Doris, I didn't go right back to gardening. I stood still in the kitchen, listening to the silence of the house, but the silence had a different quality now. It wasn't the emptiness of loneliness, it was the focused quiet of a fortress. I had deliberately cut the weak links, the bridges that the enemy could use for a flanking attack. The fortress of solitude, perhaps, was the safest place to be. I spent the rest of the afternoon finishing my work in the garden. I pruned the spent roses, fed the new saplings, and watered the beds. The familiar manual labor let my mind rest. I didn't try to plan or strategize. I simply existed in the moment, feeling the weight of the soil in my hands, smelling the scent of growing things. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. The house cast a long shadow across the lawn, and the air began to carry the cool edge of evening. As I was gathering my tools to go inside, a sound broke the peace, a knock on the front door. Not the impatient, hurried knock of Brooke, or the hesitant, guilty rap of Jason. This was a solid, firm knock. 3 distinct, even sounds. My heart skipped a beat. My body tensed. After the call with Doris, I wasn't expecting any visitors. Had Jason come back, with a different approach? Had Brooke decided to come perform another scene herself? I wiped my hands on my apron, walked through the house, and peered through the small window beside the front door. Standing on my porch was a man I hadn't seen face to face in a long time, though I often saw his figure puttering in his own yard across the street. It was Larry Jenkins. Larry was a building contractor, and more importantly, he had been one of Owen's best friends. They'd grown up together, built their first projects together, and shared cold beers after a long day's work. Larry was the embodiment of the world Owen had belonged to, a world of honesty, firm handshakes, and pride in a job well done. He was wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans with a few paint splatters on them. His face was weathered and tan, creased with the lines of time and laughter. Tucked under his arm was a long cardboard tube, the kind used for architectural drawings. Seeing him, part of me felt relief, but another part was wary. Why was he here now? I took a breath and opened the door. Larry. "Mrs. Campbell," he said, giving a respectful nod. His eyes were kind, with a hint of worry in them. "Sorry to bother you at this hour." "It's no bother. Please, come in," I said, stepping back to let him pass. He came into the living room, bringing the smell of sawdust and fresh air with him. He glanced around the room, his eyes lingering on Owen's armchair. A flicker of sadness crossed his face. "House looks the same," he said softly. "Owen would be pleased." "I try to keep it up," I replied. "Can I get you something?" "I have tea." "No, thank you. I won't stay long," he said, but he didn't sit. He seemed a little awkward, like a man bearing difficult news. "Thing is, I'm here for a reason. It's your boy, Jason. He called me this morning." My body went rigid. "Jason?" Larry nodded, his expression grim. "Yeah, he wanted to hire me and my crew. Said he and his wife just closed on a lot up in Maple Creek Ridge. Of course, it all came back to that. He sent me the preliminary designs," Larry continued, setting the cardboard tube down on the coffee table. "Wants to break ground as soon as possible, on a modern house." He said the word modern with a slight sneer, as if it were a dirty word. "All glass and steel, looks like a giant fish tank." I said nothing, waiting. I knew this wasn't the whole story. "I looked at the plans," Larry said, "and I told him, 'Jason, son, these are nice and all, but this will never get past the HOA. You know the rules about colonial architecture up in Maple Creek.'" Larry paused, looking me straight in the eye. "You know what he said to me, Mrs. Campbell?" He laughed. He said, "Don't you worry about my old man's dusty old rules. That's all being taken care of. You just need to build it." My old man's dusty old rules. The words, repeated by a third party, hit harder than they would have directly. They laid bare Jason's raw contempt for his own father's legacy. A hot flush of anger rose in me, but I pushed it down. "I told him it was his father, Owen, who wrote those rules," Larry went on, his voice now laced with a quiet fury. "I told him those rules were there to protect the value of the whole neighborhood, to protect a vision Owen cared deeply about, and he just shrugged and said times change." He shook his head, a deep disappointment etched on his face. "I turned down the job." I can't build something that goes against everything my friend believed in. I looked at the man standing before me, this loyal friend to my husband, this man of principle, and for the first time in 2 days, I didn't feel completely alone. "Thank you, Larry," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for telling me this." "Felt I had to," he said, "for Owen." His eyes then fell on the stack of papers I had left on the dining table from the night before, the HOA bylaws. "You've been looking at those?" he asked. "I've been studying them," I replied. "Good," he nodded. He walked over to the table, uncapped the cardboard tube, and carefully unrolled a large, yellowed blueprint over the bylaws. It wasn't Jason's design. This was a hand-drawn rendering, done in ink with meticulous, precise lines. I recognized Owen's handwriting in the notes on the margins immediately. It was the original sketch for the house we had dreamed of building on the Maple Creek Ridge lot, a graceful colonial with a wide porch, mullioned windows, and a garden planned for azaleas. "Owen didn't start that hoe to be a tyrant, Mrs. Campbell," Larry said softly, his hand resting on the drawing. "He wasn't the type to tell his neighbors what color to paint their fence. He started it to protect something, a vision, an idea of a community built on respect for the past and aesthetic harmony. He believed beauty mattered, that order mattered." Larry looked up at me. "If you're the owner of that lot, and the founding member, or his heir, you have a lot of power. You can stop any construction that doesn't follow the bylaws." "I know," I said, a new confidence building inside me. "I've been rereading them. I have veto power." A small smile touched Larry's lips. "Owen would be proud." He paused, then spoke with conviction. "Whatever you need, any information, a witness at an HOA meeting, I'll stand with you, for Owen, and for what's right." That simple pledge, spoken in my kitchen, was more powerful than any legal contract. An alliance had been formed. My fortress of solitude now had its first soldier. Tears pricked my eyes, but for once, they weren't tears of grief or anger. They were tears of gratitude. "Thank you, Larry. I really thank you." He just nodded, a little embarrassed by my show of emotion. He began to carefully roll up Owen's drawing. As he did, a look of hesitation crossed his face. "There's one more thing," he started, then stopped. "I don't know if I should say." "Say it, Larry. Right now I need to know everything." He let out a long breath and set the tied-up scroll back on the table. "There's a reason your boy Jason and his wife are so confident. Confident they can get the rules changed." He looked at me, and his next words hit me like a punch to the gut. "That girl, Brooke. Her father is the current president of the HOA." I froze. The air seemed to get sucked out of my lungs. "What? Brooke's father?" I repeated, unable to believe it. "Yeah. Name's Richard Sterling, a real estate lawyer. Moved in about 5 years ago after Owen was already getting frail. Smooth talker. Got himself elected president 2 years back," Larry explained, his voice full of distaste. In an instant, all the pieces clicked into place. Brooke's arrogance, Jason's confidence that it's all being taken care of. They weren't just greedy, they were conspirators. They had a man on the inside, in the highest position of power, ready to bend the rules for his family's benefit. This wasn't just a fight against my son. This was a fight against a clan, a fight against corruption at the very heart of the association Owen had created to prevent it. "Jason and Brooke have been lobbying hard," Larry said, confirming my worst fears. "They're putting forward a motion at the next quarterly meeting to amend the bylaws to allow for modern architectural expression. They're saying it'll increase property values, attract younger buyers. A lot of folks are listening." He lowered his voice. "And I've heard. They're greasing palms. Promises of neighborhood upgrades, fat contracts for local guys, all contingent on their motion passing. A taste of their own medicine. They were trying to use the HOA's own democratic mechanics to dismantle the founder's vision. They were turning Owen's shield into their own sword." Larry saw the stunned look on my face. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Campbell. I know this is a lot to take in." I shook my head, my shock hardening into ice-cold resolve. "No, Larry, don't be sorry. You've just given me the one thing I needed most." "What's that?" "A clear map of the battlefield," I said. "Now I know exactly who my enemies are and where they stand." Larry's departure left a different kind of quiet in the house. It was no longer the quiet of solitude or focus, it was the tense silence before a storm. His revelations hadn't discouraged me. On the contrary, they had lit a cold fire within me. My enemy had a face. It wasn't just a greedy young couple, it was an organized machine, with power, influence, and operating from the inside. They thought they held all the cards, but they didn't know I held the ultimate trump card, dealt to me by the very man whose legacy they were trying to erase. Sleep was impossible that night. Instead of tossing and turning in bed, I returned to the kitchen table, which had become my war room. The warm yellow light from the desk lamp cast a glow, turning the familiar space into a command center. I spread out the copy of the HOA member list Larry had discreetly left me. Beside it lay the bylaws, which I now knew by heart, and a red ballpoint pen. The work began. Based on what Larry had told me and what I knew from 40 years of living alongside these people, I began to triage. Each family's name was circled in a different color. Blue for the sure votes on my side, the old guard, Owens and my generation, who valued the quiet traditions of the neighborhood. Red for the definite votes against me, friends of the Sterling family, those who benefited from their contracts, or younger residents lured by the promise of modernization. And yellow for the undecideds, the swing votes that could go either way. Each name was a story. The Millers down the street, circled in blue. Mr. Miller had helped Owen fix our roof after a storm. The Davidsons in 6 Amperes, circled in red. Their son worked for Richard Sterling's law firm. The young couple who'd just moved into the blue house, circled in yellow. They seemed nice, but I had no idea if they valued quaint charm over resale value. It was meticulous, exhausting work, like a general counting his troops before a major battle. As the hours ticked by, a grim picture began to emerge. When I drew the final tally marks around 3 in the morning, the result was stark and undeniable. I leaned back in my chair, a heaviness in my chest. Larry had been right. To block the bylaw amendment in a straight vote, I needed a supermajority 60%, according to Owen's own rules. But based on my analysis, the Loyalists, the blue team, only made up about 40%. Sterling's red team, with its network of interests and shiny promises, commanded a similar number. The battle would be won or lost with the yellow votes, the undecideds. And in today's world, I knew the promise of increased property value often speaks louder than loyalty to an unseen legacy. Mathematically, I was going to lose. If I relied on a Democratic vote, Owen's vision would be crushed under the wheels of greed and phony progress. They had done their homework. They knew they had the numbers. That's why they were so confident. I stared at the figures on the page. For a moment, a sliver of despair crept in. Was I wrong? Was I just fighting a losing battle? But then my eyes fell on the copy of the HOA bylaws next to it. The power is in the rules, Audrey. Owen's voice was back in my head, not as a comfort, but as an instruction. I wasn't going to fight with votes. I was going to fight with the rules. Just then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed on the table. A new text message. I picked it up, squinting at the bright screen. It was from an unknown number, but the message was not. "You crazy old witch. You're going to pay for this. This is just the beginning." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. That juvenile, impotent rage could only belong to one person, Jason. My actions were starting to hit home. The inconvenience of a canceled credit card and phone had turned into fury. It was a threat, a weak attempt to scare me, but it was too late. I wasn't scared anymore. The threat only solidified my resolve. I deleted the message without replying. I looked back at my war table. The battle of numbers was lost. But the legal war had not yet begun. As dawn broke, I made a strong pot of tea and sat by the phone. I waited. I knew Preston was a methodical man. He wouldn't call until he had everything in place. At exactly 8:30 a.m., the phone rang. "Audrey," Preston's voice came on the line, dispensing with pleasantries. He sounded sharp, energized. "I've reviewed everything. The deed, the bylaws, Owen's notes. Mrs. Campbell, your husband was a genius." A small, genuine smile, the first in days, touched my lips. "I always thought so. I've double-checked with the county registrar. Your deed is ironclad and incontestable. You are the sole owner," he said, "and these bylaws Owen drafted, They're a work of legal art, tight as a drum, especially Article 4. C. The founder's veto, I said, almost in a whisper. Exactly, Preston confirmed. I had 2 of my sharpest young associates try to find a way around it. Any possible loophole. They came up with nothing. Your power is absolute, as long as it's properly activated. It can't be voted down, can't be overruled by the board. For the next 5 years, you have total authority over the architecture and construction on your lot, and over the architectural rules themselves. You essentially hold the key to the entire aesthetic vision of the neighborhood. A weight I didn't even realize I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. Hearing it from a legal expert turned my hope into a solid fact. So, I can activate it? Audrey, I already have, Preston said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. The moment I received your documents yesterday, I drafted a formal notice. A legal declaration, identifying you as the sole legal heir of founding member Owen Campbell, and invoking the veto power under Article 4, C. That notice was sent via certified mail to the HOA's office and to the home address of the president, Mr. Richard Sterling, first thing this morning. According to the Postal Service, he signed for it at 8:05 a.m. I closed my eyes, picturing the scene. Richard Sterling, probably enjoying his breakfast, receiving a legal envelope, opening it, expecting a complaint from a resident, and then reading it. Reading that his entire plan, his daughter and son-in-law's entire scheme, had just been completely and utterly blocked by a 72-year-old widow he'd probably never even noticed. What now, Preston? I asked, opening my eyes. The victory felt sweet, but I knew the fight wasn't over. Now, we wait for their reaction, he said. They're going to panic. They're going to look for a way to retaliate, but legally on this issue, their hands are tied. I do want you to be prepared, though, Audrey. They won't give up easily. They'll come after you personally. They'll try to discredit you. I know. They've already started, I replied, thinking of Doris's call and Jason's text. Good. Then we stop playing defense, Preston said, his voice hardening. Now we set a trap. A trap? Yes. They think you're just defending. We're going to let them believe you're scared and about to fold. It will make them careless, he explained his plan. It was simple and utterly brilliant. After I hung up the phone, I felt a new surge of adrenaline. I was no longer just reacting. I was taking the offensive. I picked up my phone, took a deep breath to modulate my voice, and dialed Jason. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for my call. What? He snapped. I let a little tremor enter my voice. I played the part of the confused, scared old mother. Jason, is that you? I'm sorry to bother you. What do you want? He asked, his tone devoid of any warmth. I got some legal papers from a lawyer. I don't really understand them. I lied, pitching my voice to sound pathetic. It's about the land and the association. I'm just an old woman, Jason. I don't know about these things. I've sent all the papers for the lot to Preston's office. There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. She's given the papers to a lawyer. That means she's getting ready to surrender, to negotiate. I was thinking, maybe you could go to Preston's office? I continued, my voice pleading. Help me with the papers. You understand this stuff better than I do. I just want to make sure everything is settled for the family. The silence was replaced by something that was almost a chuckle. His tone shifted completely, from angry to condescending and smug. He had taken the bait. Of course, Mom, he said, the false sweetness in his voice making me sick. I knew you'd do the right thing. You don't have to worry about a thing. I'll handle everything from here. Oh, thank you, Jason. I knew I could count on you, I said, despising myself for the words. No problem, Mom. I'll call Preston right now. He hung up. I set the phone down. My hand was no longer shaking. The smile was gone from my face, replaced by a look of cold steel. The days following that baited phone call passed in a strange quiet. The world outside went on as normal. I tended my garden, took my afternoon walks, and greeted my neighbors with a polite smile. But inside, I was profoundly changed. I no longer felt like I was living in a quiet suburb. I felt like I was moving through enemy territory. Every smile from a yellow team neighbor made me wonder, what have they been promised? Every expensive car that drove by made me think of the Sterlings and their network of influence. I had lived here for 40 years, but for the first time, I felt like an outsider. Or perhaps, not an outsider, but a silent guardian. The only one who knew the truth about the rot that was quietly infesting this community from within. The day of the quarterly HOA meeting finally arrived. It was a Thursday evening, thick and heavy with the promise of rain. The sky was a bruised gray, and the old oak trees stood perfectly still, without a breath of wind. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath. I had prepared carefully for the evening. I didn't choose a power suit or an expensive dress. That would look like I was trying to imitate Brooke. Instead, I chose a simple navy blue dress, the one Owen always said brought out the color in my eyes. I pinned on the small silver brooch he had given me for our 30th anniversary. I wanted to appear not as a combatant, but as myself, Audrey Campbell, widow, longtime resident, a piece of the history of this place. I wanted them to see the woman they had known for years, not a troublemaker. Familiarity, I believed, could be a subtle weapon. As I drove to the community clubhouse, my heart was pounding. It wasn't fear, but anticipation, the soldiers' adrenaline before the battle. I had already called Larry and Preston. We had our plan. I would go in alone first, to observe. They would arrive later, at the decisive moment. The community hall was a soulless, bland space of beige walls, linoleum floors, and rows of metal folding chairs. The air was stuffy, thick with the smell of stale coffee and repressed tension. The room was already mostly full. I recognized most of the faces, old friends, familiar neighbors, and the newer residents I knew only by a nod. I could almost see the invisible lines dividing the room, the factions formed by loyalty, self-interest, and apathy. At the front, on a low stage, sat the board of directors. Richard Sterling, Brooke's father, sat in the center, in the president's chair. He was a tall man with perfectly coiffed silver hair, wearing an expensive suit, even for this casual meeting. He radiated a slick confidence, the smile of a politician and the eyes of a shark. Beside him sat Brooke. She wasn't on the board, but her presence there, seated just behind her father, said everything. She was acting as his advisor, his handler. She wore a brilliant red silk dress, a color of defiance and challenge in a room of neutrals. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and when they landed on me standing in the doorway, a smug smile flickered across her lips. She thought I was here to surrender, or at least to witness my own pathetic defeat. And there, sitting in the front row, was my son, Jason. He was dressed up, wearing a sports coat, trying to look the part of the successful young businessman. But I could see the tension in the way he kept smoothing his tie, the way he avoided making eye contact with anyone. He knew he was betraying his own heritage, and he was trying to hide his shame behind a facade of success. He did not look at me. I quietly found an empty chair in the very back, tucking myself into a corner. I wanted to be invisible, at least for now. I wanted to listen, to watch them play out their script. Richard Sterling tapped the microphone, the amplified sound echoing through the room. "Welcome, everyone," he began, his voice smooth and authoritative. "Thank you all for taking the time to attend our quarterly meeting." He ran through the agenda items quickly: the treasurer's report, a security update, plans for the summer community picnic. It was all a preamble. Everyone in the room knew what the main event was. Finally, he arrived at it. "And now," he said, his tone shifting to one of grave importance, "we come to a significant proposal, one that could shape the future of our Maple Creek Ridge community." He gestured, and Brooke stood, moving to the side of a projector. A PowerPoint presentation flashed onto the screen behind them. The first slide was a slick image of a modern glass house, the very fish tank Larry had described, juxtaposed with an old, black and white photo of a colonial home. The caption underneath read, "The past versus the future." "For decades," Richard Sterling continued, "our community has been defined by rules set with the best of intentions. But times change, the market changes. To maintain and grow our property values, to attract young, dynamic families, we must be willing to adapt." Brooke then began her presentation. She spoke fluently and persuasively, using terms like maximizing return on investment, progressive vision, and architectural diversity. She presented charts and graphs showing how property values had soared in neighboring communities that allowed for modern construction. It was a slick performance, designed to appeal to everyone's greed and fear of being left behind. "We are not proposing to eliminate the rules entirely," Brooke said, her tone dripping with reasonableness. "We are simply proposing a minor amendment to Article 12A, an amendment that allows for flexibility, for choice, beginning with a flagship project on Lot 4B that will put Maple Creek Ridge on the map as a forward-thinking community." They didn't even bother to hide that this was all for their own benefit. They wrapped it in the flowery language of community good, but at its core, it was naked self-interest. When the presentation ended, Richard Sterling took the microphone again. "Thank you, Brooke. As you can see, this is an opportunity we can't afford to miss. I now move that we proceed to a vote on the amendment of Article 12A of the bylaws." He was moving to end it quickly, without allowing for debate. He knew he had the votes. A few murmurs went through the crowd, but no one stood to object. My side, the older, quieter residents, just looked at each other helplessly. That's when I knew it was time. The doors at the back of the hall burst open. The sound in the quiet room was like a gunshot. Every head turned. And I, from my chair in the corner, slowly rose to my feet. There was a collective gasp. They had forgotten I was there. They thought I was a passive spectator. Jason looked like he'd seen a ghost. Brooke's face tightened in annoyance. Richard Sterling was the first to recover. He looked at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, but he tried to maintain his air of authority. "Mrs. Campbell?" he asked, as if speaking to a lost child. What are you doing? This is a board meeting." I didn't answer him. My eyes were on the open doorway. Larry Jenkins walked in first. He wasn't in his work clothes, but in a clean shirt and khaki pants. He walked with the confidence of a man with nothing to hide. Behind him came Preston Vance. In his charcoal gray suit, horn-rimmed glasses, and with a leather briefcase in his hand, he radiated an aura of legal power and erudition. His presence instantly changed the dynamic of the room. This was no longer a community meeting. This was a legal proceeding. I began to walk, slowly, up the center aisle. My footsteps echoed on the tile floor. The murmuring in the room died completely. Everyone was holding their breath, watching. I didn't look at anyone, just straight ahead at Richard Sterling. I stopped at the front row. Larry and Preston stood on either side of me, like two sentinels. The three of us formed a united front. "I am the owner of Lot 4B, I said, my voice clear and steady in the silence. "I believe I have a right to be here." Richard Sterling looked flustered. His politician's smile had vanished. This is not on the agenda," he stammered. "Then consider this a point of order," Preston Vance said, his lawyer's voice booming. He stepped forward and placed his briefcase on the secretary's table with a definitive thud. He opened it and took out a folder. "Pursuant to the official notice delivered to and signed for by President Sterling on Tuesday morning of this week," Preston began, his tone as cold and precise as a legal brief. "My client, Mrs. Audrey Campbell, as the sole and legal owner of record for Maple Creek Ridge, Lot 4B, and as the sole legal heir of founding member Owen Campbell." Preston paused for a second, letting the words sink in, letting everyone in the room understand their gravity. "Hereby formally invokes the founder's veto power as stipulated in Article 4C of the Association Bylaws." He held up a piece of paper. "Any and all motions to amend, alter, or otherwise nullify any clause within Chapter 4, the Architectural Regulations, including Article 12A, are hereby immediately and unconditionally rejected." He placed that paper down. He took out another. "Furthermore, any and all requests, proposals, or permits, potential, current, or future, pertaining to any construction on Lot 4B that does not strictly adhere to the established colonial architectural style, are hereby indefinitely suspended." He looked directly at Richard Sterling, then at Brooke, and finally at Jason. "Construction is halted. The vote is canceled. This matter is closed." The silence in the room was so thick, you could feel it. It was heavy with shock and disbelief. Then, like a dam breaking, the murmurs started, growing into a roar of confused noise. I looked at the faces of my enemies. Richard Sterling's jaw was slack, his face flushed with rage and public humiliation. Jason looked as if the floor had just opened up beneath him. He buried his head in his hands, unable to look at anyone. But my eyes landed on Brooke. Her carefully made-up face was ashen. The confidence, the arrogance, the superiority, it was all gone. All that was left was raw disbelief, and then a look of pure, venomous hatred directed right at me. In that moment, I knew that while I had won the battle, the war was far from over. It had just entered a new, more dangerous, and much more personal phase. The chaotic scene at the HOA meeting was just the beginning. News of my coup spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. My phone rang off the hook. Some called to congratulate me, their voices full of excitement and admiration. Others, Sterling's allies, called with veiled threats. I didn't answer any of them. The battle was now out in the open, and it had to be finished, not through anonymous phone calls, but in a final, face-to-face confrontation. That confrontation came 2 days later, not in my kitchen or the community hall, but on the cold, neutral ground of Preston Vance's large conference room. This was Preston's home turf, a space fortified by leather-bound law books and the weight of justice. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and strong coffee. A long, polished mahogany table split the room in two, a battle line drawn in wood. The light from the large windows overlooking downtown Atlanta was muted by blinds, creating a somber, tense atmosphere, like the inside of a submerged submarine. We arrived early, me, Preston, and Larry. We sat on one side of the table in silence. Larry, in his Sunday best, sat with a straight back, his rough builder's hands resting calmly on the table, looking out of place but resolute. Preston, in contrast, was perfectly in his element. He sat back, his fingers steepled, his expression placid but his sharp eyes missing nothing. I sat between them, feeling the quiet strength radiating from these two loyal men. I was no longer a lonely widow. I was the commander of a small, elite army. The door opened and the other side entered. They looked like hell. The polished confidence they'd worn at the HOA meeting was gone, replaced by the shabby, exhausted look of defeat and rage. Jason came first. No sports coat now, just a wrinkled shirt. He was unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes. He wouldn't look at me, just shuffled to the farthest chair and slumped into it. Richard Sterling followed, but his aura of power had deflated. His suit was still expensive, but it seemed to hang on his now slumped shoulders. The politician's smile was replaced by a sullen, bitter scowl. Last came Brooke. She was still trying to project an image of control, but the tension was visible in the white-knuckled grip on her purse, the tight clench of her jaw. Her red dress today didn't look vibrant. It looked like a splash of blood in the dim room. I realized the reason for their haggard appearance. My 1,000 cuts had been working. The car had been repossessed. The credit cards were dead. The creature comforts they took for granted had been stripped away, forcing them to face the ugly reality of their actual financial situation. They hadn't just lost a legal battle, they were losing their daily lives. They sat on the opposite side of the table. A heavy, hostile silence filled the room. Preston broke it. "Thank you for coming," he said, his tone civil but utterly devoid of warmth. "The purpose of this meeting is to clarify a few matters and find a path forward that avoids unnecessary future litigation." Brooke let out a short, contemptuous laugh. "Unnecessary litigation? Your client?" She glared at me. "Just sabotaged a multi-million-dollar development. We'll sue her for economic damages. We lost a massive deposit." She was trying to bluff, to regain the offensive through intimidation, but Preston just smiled faintly, the smile of a chess master who sees 10 moves ahead. "Did you, Miss Sterling?" he asked softly. "What economic damages would those be?" As I understand it, Mrs. Campbell did nothing more than enforce the established rules and bylaws of the very homeowners association that your father, he nodded at Richard Sterling, is sworn to uphold. If any damages were incurred, it was due to your own lack of due diligence in pursuing a project that was in clear violation of existing regulations. Preston's words were precise and cold as a scalpel. They cut off Brooke's argument before it could even form. Richard Sterling's face darkened further. "This is ridiculous," Sterling growled. "That antiquated clause should have been removed years ago. It's holding back progress. We had the votes to change it." "Perhaps," Preston conceded. But you hadn't changed it, and as long as it is in the bylaws, it has the full force of law, and my client legally invoked it. On that front, you have no case. He paused, looking directly at Sterling. However, while we're on the subject of rules and legality, my team took some time to review the HOA's old records, and we found a rather interesting anomaly. Preston slowly opened his briefcase in a move of pure theater. He pulled out a slim file and slid it across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of Richard Sterling. "Take a look." Sterling looked down at the file suspiciously, then reluctantly picked it up. I saw his hand tremble slightly. Brooke and Jason leaned in to see. "That's a land boundary agreement between the HOA and an adjacent developer, signed 3 years ago," Preston explained, his voice even but heavy with implication. "A rather favorable agreement for that developer. A developer who, I believe your law firm, Mr. Sterling, represented in the deal. An interesting coincidence." Sterling said nothing, his face starting to pale. "But what's more interesting," Preston continued, "is that the agreement required the signature of at least 2 founding members or their board, appointed proxies at the time. And as you can see, it has 2 signatures, yours and Owen Campbell's." My heart stopped. "Owen's?" "The problem is," Preston said, his voice now like ice, "we checked the medical records. 3 years ago, on the exact date this document was supposedly signed, Owen Campbell was bedridden in the hospital following a severe round of chemotherapy. He could barely hold a pen, let alone sign a complex legal document. Mr. Jenkins here can attest to that." Preston nodded at Larry. Larry, who had been silent until now, spoke, his voice low and firm. "I was with him all that day. Owen didn't sign anything. He wasn't even strong enough to read." Preston's gaze snapped back to Richard Sterling. "We hired a forensic handwriting expert. His preliminary conclusion is that the signature of Owen Campbell on that document is, almost certainly, a forgery." A dead silence fell over the room. The word forgery hung in the air, toxic and irrefutable. Brooke stared at her father, her mouth agape. Jason looked completely broken, as if his world had just caved in. Richard Sterling sat frozen, the file slipping from his nerveless fingers. "Fraud," Preston said, his voice flat and emotionless, "and gross malfeasance in violation of the HOA charter are more than enough grounds for an immediate board-sponsored vote of no confidence to remove you from your presidency. That's before we even get to the potential criminal charges and the effect on your law license." The trap had been sprung, and it was bigger and more ruthless than they could have possibly imagined. Preston hadn't just blocked their plan, he had destroyed their power base. That's when Jason finally broke completely. All the pretense, the arrogance, the resentment, it all dissolved, leaving only the raw, pathetic truth of a boy who realized he had lost everything. He turned on Brooke, then on his father-in-law, his eyes red with the tears of rage and self-pity. "It was all for a stupid house," he screamed, his voice cracking in the soundproofed room. "It was all for your ambition. I've lost everything. My mother, my inheritance, everything." His words didn't touch me. I felt no pity, no satisfaction. I just felt a vast, empty distance. The weeping man was not my son. My son was long gone, replaced by this weak, greedy stranger. I slowly rose to my feet. All eyes in the room turned to me. I didn't look at Brooke or her father. I looked only at Jason, at the wreckage of the man he had become. I looked at him one last time. My voice, when it came, was calm and clear, echoing in the silence after his scream. "Because a bank, Jason," I said, repeating his own cruel words back to him, "must always protect its assets." I paused, letting the words sink in. "And my most valuable assets," I continued, "are the truth and your father's honor." With that, I turned my back. I didn't need to look again. I didn't need to see the fallout. Larry and Preston rose with me. As I walked out of the conference room, I could feel Brooke's hateful glare burning into my back, but it didn't matter anymore. I walked out of the dimness of the law office and into the bright afternoon Sunday. I had gone into this fight, a grieving widow, and I was walking out a survivor. I had protected my husband's legacy, and more importantly, I had reclaimed my own. Stepping out of Preston's office building was like shrugging off an invisible weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. The Atlanta sun seemed brighter, the air fresher. The war was over, but there were no victory parades, no loud celebrations. Just a profound quiet, the peace that comes after a storm has finally passed. Larry and Preston walked on either side of me. Larry placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Mrs. Campbell," he said, his voice full of respect. Preston simply smiled, a quiet smile that held a world of admiration. I was grateful to them, not just for their professional help, but for standing with me when I thought I was all alone. They had shown me that loyalty still existed in the world. In the following days, the wreckage from the confrontation drifted back to me, not in dramatic phone calls, but in the quiet whispers of the neighborhood. The small pieces of news passed along. Like after an earthquake, people were assessing the damage. The Sterling Campbell drama collapsed quickly and spectacularly. As Preston predicted, word of the forgery leaked among the HOA board. Facing a disgraceful removal from office and a potential criminal investigation, Richard Sterling quietly resigned as president, citing health reasons. He sold his house and was gone from Maple Creek Ridge within a month, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. His little empire had crumbled over a single signature. Brooke did not handle failure well. For her, life was a social ladder, and her marriage to Jason had been a strategic move. Now, Project Jason was a toxic asset. Her family was disgraced. The dream house was gone. The Bank of Mom was closed. According to the neighborhood gossips, there were furious arguments coming from their rented house, sounds of shouting and breaking furniture. Then, one afternoon, I saw a moving truck parked in their driveway. Brooke was supervising the movers, her face a cold, emotionless mask. She wasn't leaving with Jason. She was leaving Jason. She went back to her family, blaming her husband's weakness and failure for tarnishing the Sterling name. Their relationship, built on a foundation of greed and calculation, couldn't withstand the test of adversity. It was as fragile as the glass house they had craved. And Jason, my son. The consequences for him were the most devastating. He lost not only his wife and his future home, but his entire sense of direction. Without Brooke to push him and my money to cushion him, he was adrift. His small business, always on shaky ground, quickly went bankrupt. He lost the house, the car, and from what I heard, had to move into a shabby rental in an unfamiliar part of town. He had lost everything, just as he had screamed in Preston's office. But he didn't understand that he had started losing it all long before, on the day he decided loyalty had a price tag. Several months passed. Summer gave way to autumn. The leaves on the old oak trees began to turn brilliant shades of gold and red. My garden changed too, the bright blooms of summer replaced by the muted beauty of chrysanthemums and asters. My life had found its peaceful rhythm again, but it was a new kind of peace, a stronger one. One afternoon, as I was deadheading the last of the roses, the phone in my apron pocket buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it anyway. A silence. Then, a voice, one I almost didn't recognize, it was so weak and broken. "Mom?" It was Jason. I stood still, the pruning shears in my hand. A cool autumn wind rustled through the garden. I know I have no right to call," he continued, his voice choked with sobs. "But I have no one else. I was wrong, Mom. I was wrong about everything. Brooke left me. I lost my job. I don't know what to do." He started to cry then, the pathetic, broken sobs of a man who had hit rock bottom. A tiny part of me, the ghost of a mother's love, felt a pang. But it was fleeting, like a phantom pain in a limb that had been amputated. "I just wanted to ask," he said through his tears. Don't you owe me one last chance? Don't you owe me one last chance?" Even in his desperation, he used that word. Oh. He still thought of our relationship as a transaction, a series of obligations and entitlements. He still didn't get it. He didn't understand that some things, once broken, can't be fixed. Some words, once said, can't be unsaid. He hadn't just asked for money. He had insulted his father's memory, tried to gaslight me into thinking I was losing my mind, and called my love a debt. I listened to him cry, my face expressionless. I looked out at my garden, at the golden leaves falling, covering the ground in a beautiful carpet. Everything in nature has its season. A time to be born, a time to grow, and a time to die. My relationship with Jason had run its course. And then, With a calm that was absolute, I gently pressed the button to end the call. I felt no guilt. I felt no regret. I felt only a final, quiet release. I had paid all my debts. It's been 5 years since that day. My life is truly peaceful now. After Richard Sterling's departure, the HOA held a new election. Pushed by Larry and the old guard, I was reluctantly nominated and then elected as the honorary president of the association. I don't deal with the day-to-day business, but my voice, the voice of Owen's legacy, is always heard and respected. The plot of land in Maple Creek Ridge, the source of all the conflict, did not lie fallow. Doris, after a long period of shame, came to me. She cried and she apologized. She admitted she had been blind, that she had let emotion cloud her judgment. I forgave her. Together, with Larry and the help of the community, we turned that lot into something even more beautiful than the house Owen and I had dreamed of. It is now the Maple Creek Community Garden, a traditional, green space with vegetable plots, climbing roses, and a single oak bench under the largest tree where people can come to sit and talk. I go there most mornings, when the dew is still on the petals. I don't think about Jason much anymore. Sometimes a memory will flicker past, an image of a laughing, blonde-haired boy, but it's distant, like an old dream. I heard he left the city, took some manual labor job far away. I sincerely hope he finds his own peace, that he learns the value of things that can't be bought. But that is a path he has to walk alone. Looking back on it all, I realize a profound truth. I used to think family was defined by blood, but I was wrong. Blood creates a connection, but it doesn't guarantee loyalty or love. Real family, the family I have found in my later years, is built on something else: mutual respect, shared values, and a loyalty that is earned and tested. My family now is Larry, the steadfast friend; Preston, the wise counsel; Doris, the sister who learned to see past her own tears; and the neighbors who joined me in turning a piece of disputed land into a symbol of unity. That war didn't take anything from me. It gave me back myself. It forced me to find a strength I had forgotten I had, to turn grief into action, to realize that gentleness is not the same as weakness. Owen left me more than just money or property. He left me a set of rules, a map, and most importantly, the belief that I was strong enough to follow it on my own. I used to be a bank, but now I am a gardener. I no longer hoard assets that can be valued and demanded. I cultivate things far more precious: peace of mind, the respect of my community, and a legacy of beauty and order, one that will last long after I'm gone, just like the old oak trees that still stand guard over Owen's garden. And that is a wealth no greedy hand can ever touch. Thank you for listening to my whole story. If this resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And don't forget to leave a comment below with your own perspective, insights, or story, so we can connect and share with one another.